Hey everybody, welcome to We've Got Ward, a Doof Media podcast series where we expertly dissect and discuss Ward, Wildbow's return to the world of parahumans. I am Matt Freeman, and this is my miserable, deluded little co-host, Scott Daly.
Wow.
What? It's a term of endearment, like you would use with a sibling. Now, start the fucking podcast or I will break you.
This is the weekly podcast where Matt and I eagerly dive into Wildbow's world of justification, fuck buddies, and alien-based death powers as we analyze and interpret this ongoing web serial. This week on the show, we continue Arc 17 Sundown with chapters 17.5 and 17.6. Victoria has a nice, pleasant chat with Amy as she prepares to invade Gimel with the giant shard monsters to save it or something. It probably makes sense if you're Amy. Vicky manages to talk Amy down into a compromise, but in the process loses her cool in front of everyone. After an extensive evaluation by a highly not paid intern and the reveal that the world's greatest therapist does indeed strangle children, Victoria is benched. In this case, benched is both literal and somehow also a euphemism for going to Bangtown. Matt, what do you think of these two chapters?
Very harrowing stuff, right? Like we're with this arc, we're definitely continuing to go in a certain direction with Victoria. Mm-hmm. It's painful to see her in this state, right? But as you said, she gets to go to Bangtown, so that's nice.
It's nice, yeah. I mean, I think what we kind of have been talking about this entire arc about her kind of slowly being pulled away from everyone, and the only place she has to turn is becoming increasingly more only her shard. That's what we've been doing, and we continue to do this big time throughout this these couple chapters for sure.
Yeah. And of course I have to comment, Scott, you don't think I'm right here, but what happens after the sun goes down? What happens after the sun goes down? You know, people get busy. We've got literally 100% more sexual activity in this arc than we have seen in previous arcs.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think you're wrong. I just don't know if, like, as Wildbow is like, what should we call the arc? Well, Victoria's gonna fuck, so let's call it Sundown.
Well, okay, but also we've got the Byron. Okay, so setting aside the Sundown connection, this is the nudity chapter, or arc rather. So it's just interesting to me. I mean, I wonder if there's going to be more along these lines throughout this arc, or if this is, the end.
Certainly hope so.
I mean, and I'm not including the giant naked nursery monsters in that, although maybe I should. Maybe you should. You should. They did, we did skip over that last week, the fact that they had erections that if you pricked them with a needle, it looked like they'd cut someone in half. That's an image that we missed out on talking about on the podcast.
Yeah, we definitely
had the opportunity.
It was definitely an accident that we didn't talk about that.
Yeah. So you thought you were going to get out of having to hear about that again, but I went back and salvaged it. All right.
Hooray.
So some quick announcements before we get into the episode. Actually, just one.
Yeah.
The Halloween costume contest is ongoing for roughly one more week. And then it will be over, and then we will see who the winner is. But yeah, just send a photo of you or somebody in a parahumans themed Halloween costume to gotwormpod@gmail.com and make it happen. Let's do it. I want to see.
Yeah, that is due the day after Halloween, as it is a Halloween contest. So make sure you get those in, and the full rules and prizes and all that nonsense is linked in the show notes to this episode. So click on that link if you want to know more.
All right. Now let's get on into 17.5.
Let's do it. I can't wait.
So as we talked about for a minute there, so far this arc has been hammering on a few specific ideas. Victoria's sense of connection with her family and friends has been undermined from multiple angles. Her sense of confidence in herself and her very sense of identity have been shaken. And this is all played out both through the plot, as her team is effectively robbed from her, and through the conceit of powers, as her brain is put through a shard blender and then poured back into her head. And here these chapters continue and elaborate on these ideas and others.
Yeah, and as we talked about last week, and I'm sure I'm going to talk about again, this all feels very climactic to me. And not in the sense that like I think the ending is coming like now, right? But I do think that we're getting to a point where things are definitely starting to come together, right? We have like everything you're talking about there, the sense of identity, the sense of control, all Victoria's wants and all her needs are lining up. And also we have Amy in really the most directly antagonistic role she's been in the entire story so far, where she is literally standing between Victoria and her goals. And so that feels like we're getting towards the third act of our overall story.
Yeah. I mean, I might even go so far as to say that some of the like very small decisions in this chapter feel significant, or these chapters, like physically getting Amy to sort of come out of whatever, bunker she's been in and be more or less on the front lines. That feels important to me. We'll see if it is, but it felt that way.
Yeah, she's on the field. She's on the chessboard now.
Yeah, right. She's not never been in that position, but rarely in the story has she been active and actively using her power in the sort of ongoing situation.
Yeah.
So Victoria joins in on the conference call with Amy and her entourage, including some Sheen representatives, Lewis among them. Throughout these chapters, there's this motif of Victoria's italicized thoughts intruding more than usual, I think. Not that Vicky doesn't regularly color our perceptions with her thoughts, but I think there's a higher than usual frequency of not just her thoughts, but of the italics in particular. It gives the text this specific sense of like a volleying, like constant running commentary, like beat, reaction, just constantly.
Yeah, I agree. And we've talked about this before, how, this entire book is Victoria's thoughts, right? It's a first person perspective story, but there is a distinct difference between the narration of Victoria's thoughts and these specific italicized thoughts, where it's almost specifically her mind verbalizing stuff in her head. And you're right, we see a lot of these here, and I love that, the idea that it sets up this rhythm, that sense of volleying. You're right, and I think, I think this is the place where we can maybe most see, like you talked about early in the arc, if these reaction beats were we're being tricked a little bit maybe, and it's not even Victoria's point of view, and maybe we're seeing things in those italicized beats from Waste's point of view. I don't think it's quite that, but I think we do see Waste come through in some of those italicized moments, maybe more than in other areas. And I think that beat reaction thing you pointed out really does help this chapter specifically with its sense of tension, right? Because it's like things are boiling over, and while, externally there's really no buildup in Victoria's head, in these moments where she's having these reactions to every one of the things Amy says, it creates this sense of escalation, the sense of building of tension until it boils over. And the moment that it boils over is the moment which this internal italicized thought becomes an external dialogued thought. And that, I think it's a really neat path from her saying everything to herself to suddenly she can't hold it in anymore and she says it out loud.
I like that a lot. I like how you explain that, right? We're made aware of the level of anger that's within her, without the text having to say, Victoria was very angry. It's a good mechanism. And it's something that you're exactly right. It works there, but then she continues to have, I think, I didn't count necessarily, but I think a higher frequency of italicized interjections and just overall a lot more kind of angry internal criticism that's happening.
Yeah. I think it is definitely anecdotal, but in my perception, we are seeing more of that in this arc and these chapters specifically than we have in possibly the whole book.
Yeah. Again, I don't even know how I would go about counting such a thing, but I'm pretty sure that that's the case.
Sure, Kai can stun it or something.
Right. Yeah, let's get on that. So yeah, Amy is apparently named the Chevalier Avatar the Gibberim Knight. Man, I didn't look it up beforehand. I was going to.
I mean, it's definitely Hebrew, so it's probably not pronounced that way, but whatever.
Gibberim, something like that.
Sure.
Gibberim, and says he fundamentally wants what Chevalier wants. And this is painted as good by Amy, setting aside that they also have a goddess and Mather's creation who, if logic follows, would presumably want what their hosts want.
I love that you pulled that out because I hadn't quite made that connection, but you're absolutely right that like using this as a defense for why it's okay to be sending this knight here. It's like, oh, it's exactly like Chevalier is basically countering the use of goddess Miss Mathers and nursery, right? Like she is basically contradicting herself directly there.
Yeah. It's ridiculous.
And it's part of this doublespeak of this chapter that I actually find really delightful from just like a writing perspective. Amy is like, from an external point of view to people who don't know her, Amy is very good at having an excuse and a reason for everything and building a case around why this is fine. People that hang out with her or have seen through all this, like Victoria and now us, the audience, see right through that and see it as bullshit. But a lot of other people don't. And the thing I love about this chapter is this chapter could only exist and only work after those Amy interludes, right? This was written with the knowledge that we have seen Amy and seen inside Amy's head, and Wildbow is using that we have that knowledge, and so she's giving us this double speak, right? Where it's just like if you just pause and think about it for a minute, and you know how Amy's thought process works, you're like, hey, wait a minute, that's bullshit.
Yeah, I thought it was fascinating how Crystal says she didn't used to be this bad at a certain point, and which is basically calling direct attention to the circularity and bullshittiness of her thought process.
Yeah.
And Victoria being like, yeah, she absolutely did. Nobody else noticed it, though.
Yeah. The stakes are just higher now, is I think what she says. Yeah. And I think that's really important for a lot of what I think this chapter is very cleverly doing in the background, which is kind of showing how, from an external point of view, a lot of what's happening is not a good look for our protagonist, because they are lacking so much of the context that Victoria and us, the reader, has.
Right. I mean, so I think last week we talked about the fact that like this book put us in this place of really being in the head of someone who has been abused, who absolutely knows that this abusive person is exactly as bad as they are, and yet the situation around them is such that everybody else is skeptical.
Mm-hmm.
And that was true last week. That's true yet again this week. In fact, if anything, we're emphasizing more that latter part of the statement where everybody in this room is just kind of like baffled and confused, and Victoria has to be the one to almost painfully drag them to the point of being like, look, like you're not going to be able to deal with her as a rational person, and them and them almost reacting like, well, you would say that because of your history, it's frustrating for our character, it's frustrating for us, and it's just a great kind of magic trick that Wildbow is playing to put us in this position of this character.
Yeah, I love it. I love it a lot. It's very complicated. It's nuanced. There's a lot of subtextual stuff going on here that I really enjoy. Because like on the surface, the first time I read this, you're just like, this is infuriating. This is absolutely infuriating. Reading this chapter got me angry. It got me really angry. I was just like turning over tables in my anger at Amy. But if you really try to zoom into this and try, I think reading it where you're trying to read it from the perspective of someone who is not aware of the full extent of the history between these two characters, and all they know about Amy is some stuff that happened before Gold Morning, but then all the hero work she's been doing, quote unquote hero work she's been doing up until now, it reads very differently.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And that's fascinating. It's fascinating that it can work on those different levels.
Totally.
Before we move on, I just wanted to point out we haven't done like a name game in a while. In fact, like I think it's been months. We just kind of accidentally removed that section. But the Jibborim, and again, apologies for not knowing Hebrew. It is a Hebrew word that roughly means like mighty, mightiest, or sometimes hero, which fits perfectly with Chevalier, right? But also we've compared these guys to Endbringers multiple times, and using like a Hebrew name for these things slots very nicely into that comparison, right? Like with Leviathan and Behemoth. Okay, Semerg is Persian, not Hebrew, but shut up, it works.
Yeah. Well, I mean, here in these chapters, we actually have LaRue refer to her as Ziz. So
yeah, that's true. Yeah.
It almost seems like different groups of people use different names. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's fun to think about.
Do we know like who named them originally? Like who was the person that gave them their names? I don't know if we know that.
No. I don't think so. I don't know that anyway. So yeah, after the first exchange, the Sheenians go mute and they have a quick powwow, and Narwhal scolds Victoria for her snark. Victoria tries to clarify that what she's doing is a tactic, and that she expects that managing Amy is inseparable from managing the situation at large.
Yeah, and I think this is kind of back to what you were talking about when people are just like, they don't get it, and they don't get it to the point where Victoria's... I love it, because basically Victoria says, oh, did you brainwash them? And Amy's like, no, of course I didn't. I don't brainwash people, Victoria, which is hilarious. But Victoria immediately is like, you're right. Of course you're right. And Narwhal interprets this as snark, but it's not. It's not snark. She's actually just playing the exact game she needs to play here.
Yeah.
And I love what she says here is like, Amy wants to hear that she's right more than she cares about the accusation. Right? I love that idea. It's like, it doesn't, you can say the meanest thing in the world to her, but as long as at the end of that statement, you tell her she's right, she doesn't care anymore.
Yeah. Right. It's this whole psychology that she's built up of just like anything that supports me is good, and I can just kind of disregard anything that doesn't.
Yeah.
And Victoria's using this against her in a very clever way.
Yeah.
So, we then continue as the scene goes on to see that Victoria is indeed right. Mm-hmm. Narwhal tries to engage Amy using logic and fails utterly.
She's immune. She's immune to logic.
Yeah.
It's part of her powers. I do really like that. I think there is, we talked about this a little bit last week because Victoria specifically mentioned it, but I think there is some level at which Victoria enjoys this a little bit, enjoys seeing Narwhal be like, well, what the fuck is wrong with this person? Like, why is she not, this is ridiculous. Like, I think there's a point where she's just like, Amy, that doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
And you can imagine Victoria in the background being like, see, I fucking told you. None of that's in the text here, but I think it's a natural extension of what we saw last time is this vindication.
I think it's beautifully conveyed through the evolution of Narwhal's behavior, as you can kind of see the wheels turning as she's like, what the fuck is she talking about? Yeah. And like she'll try different things, and then eventually she gives over control to Victoria. Like one thing I will say about the chapter is it's not just hitting you over the head with this idea of, oh, Victoria's like embarrassing herself in front of everyone by losing her cool. Narwhal is actually basically like, all right, Victoria gets her fine.
Yeah.
Yeah. Narwhal's not one of the people who's judging her, assuming that, there are people in the room who are judging her.
Well, yeah. And I mean, it goes back to this very detailed description of this room that we got, right? Where there's a lot of people in the room. They're in different areas. They're different parts of the room. Some of them are people that she recognizes. Some of them are people that she doesn't. There's an inner circle that's dealing directly with the communication. And they seem to be in the know, but there are other people that aren't. And Victoria is very conscious of this the entire time. And I think the next chapter dives into one of those people really specifically.
Definitely, yeah.
There's one thing I wanted to point out here before we move on is this line where I think Wildbow like ominously sets up what's going to happen later in the chapter, because Victoria is trying to tell people like the strategy for Amy, and she's like, she's a damaged individual with a lot of power, and one thing she wants that isn't in line with what Shin, and then she gets interrupted. But we know enough to know exactly what she's about to say there, which is the one thing that she wants that isn't in line with what Shin wants is me. And that is very much setting up to the decision that Victoria is going to make at the end of this chapter, where she basically becomes the bait to Amy to manipulate her. And we'll talk about when we get there. I find that horrifying that Victoria has to do that and allows herself to do that. But this is a great way of kind of
Right.
setting up that we're heading that direction.
Horrifying, but entirely within character.
Oh yeah. No, right. I'm not critiquing it.
Of course.
I'm mad at Victoria for constantly hurting herself.
Yeah, we'll get there. Yeah. So Louis speaks up to support something that Amy says, that they're not interested in balance, but in fairness, or specifically in what is just. And Victoria goes on to say, or to think, just was only a good word if the person leaning on them felt like they were making the concession. I want to see her die burning, but I have to grudgingly admit that it would be wrong and barbaric. 10 years in prison and a course toward rehabilitation is justice. But if it came from the top, from a place of paramount power, from a place of satisfaction, then just changed from justice to justification. Justification for revenge. Justification for wrongs. And I just love this. I'm just like, exactly, Victoria, my dude. Yes, totally.
Yeah. This might not be very intellectually profound of me, Matt, but I loved reading this. I think of art and storytelling should be challenging, right? Like, it should challenge your preconceived notions. It should challenge your view of the world by offering characters and settings and themes, etc., that you haven't encountered before. But every once in a while, it's just nice to read a story and hear a character that you really respect basically formulate your exact opinion on something and just be like, yeah, exactly. This is exactly how I feel. And the idea of justice and justification as a reflection of the power dynamic between people is an interesting thing that I fully 100% agree with. So it's just really nice and satisfying on a very basic level to read this and be like, yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I mean, I think justice is something we've talked about before in the show, and I just really like this articulation of it personally.
Yeah, I agree. And it's also an interesting angle on the parahuman versus human relationship, right? This idea that if you are the one that has the power, if you are the person leaning on the other people, it isn't justice, it's justification. And I think that's interesting in the lens of who in this society has the power, who has the ability to lean on who.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I don't know. I mean, it's a rabbit hole I could go down forever, right?
Right.
I mean, there's no objective justice, right? There's no cosmic justice.
No.
It all comes down to perspectives. And yeah, you're pointing out, of course, correctly, that in this world, the parahumans have this massive, like, advantage over the normal humans. And so this is not something Victoria's aware of in this context. Maybe we'll come back to this later. Yeah,
I mean, the reason I'm bringing this up is specifically because the parahuman human power dynamic and relationship becomes very central to the next chapter. So
yeah.
I think it's just something that popped into my head rereading these chapters because it's such an important part of what the book is doing in that next chapter.
Yeah. So there's this interesting moment in here where Mark is relaying some of the information, how there will be 15 of these creations soon. And it's very interesting to just imagine him waking up to what he's gotten himself into.
Yeah. And I love Victoria's thoughts here, where it says he sounded a little awed by what he was saying. No doubt he had Amy beside him looking confident. Was it only now sinking in? What are you doing, Dad? What are you thinking? And I really think we need a Mark interlude very soon, right? I think we've been like hinting and noting his behavior and speculating on what the hell is going on with this dude for a while now. And I really want to see what's in his head. Has he completely deluded himself? Is he fully aware of what's going on now, but he feels trapped? I want to know. I want to see in his head real bad.
Yeah, I mean, he's definitely, like, we've seen these glimpses of him, and he just seems to be in his own little fantasy world.
Yeah,
like in terms of where Amy is specifically, in terms of where his family is, in terms of what the status quo is. Like he's just kind of shuffling through things. And but I don't know if that read is accurate because we've really, it's a read that's pieced together from relatively small amount of text. So I agree. I'd love to find out more about how he's doing.
Yeah.
Carol is encouraged just to open a side chat with Mark because apparently family is regarded differently on Shin. And they talk about the meeting with Sarah, which Amy can't help but needlessly comment on. And then quickly shift back toward being a conversation about what she's up to. Narwhal confronts her about the horrific risk of what she's doing, and she responds with that old Dallin chestnut, "I'm in control."
Yeah, I like how it fits so much with what Victoria was talking about her family, right? Like this idea of people are either in control or completely out of control in my family. That's the way it works. And here's another Dallin professing control, but yeah.
I mean, it's been Amy's particular struggle all the way back to the relatively recent interlude, but Victoria has contextualized that as being a Dallin trait or a Dallin adjacent trait.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's, of course, this is a moment where you immediately know that's bullshit. I mean, that's one thing. If it's one thing the Amy interludes did for us, it's allowed us to see through that statement without question, right? This idea that she's in control. Victoria always doubted it. The interludes confirmed that Victoria's doubt was completely justified. And now every time we get to see her say it, we get to immediately go, yeah, okay, sure.
I mean, isn't that literally what she said when she reverted Victoria back to her original body and then probably made a mistake?
Yeah.
I'm in control. Yeah.
But I want to kind of zoom back to that conversation about Sarah, because I think you're right that Amy basically hijacks that conversation. Mark and Carol are talking, and Amy hijacks it and makes it about her, saying like, I wish I was there. I wish I could see her. I wish I could help with everything. And then takes that and pivots back to what she wanted to talk about, which is everything else. And that sucks. It really does. It sucks. But I want to do that. I want to do that thing where we kind of look at this from the perspective of some of the other people standing in the room and what they might see here, right? Because I think to some people in this room, without the full context of the family history, it just looks like Amy's asking about her family. I miss you guys. I wish I could see you guys. I wish I could come check on you. I wish I could finish making mom all better. And it's disgusting and gross because we know Amy and we know what she did. And it's especially out of place in this moment of like near interdimensional war that is about to happen. But if you're inclined to like Amy or see her as a hero, as we know many of the wardens do, especially some of the lower level wardens, isn't it just a humanizing moment? A moment of her being genuinely worried about her family?
Yeah. I think that's a really interesting thing going on here because, correct me if I'm wrong, but aren't there a lot of people in this room?
Yes.
And Victoria is basically tunnel visioned into the capes in the room. Like she's not really thinking about anyone else.
Mm-hmm.
And so that means we stop thinking about them too, to a degree. But of course, because you and I are rereading these chapters like 3 times and then taking notes, we can't help but think about the fact that, the average person in this room doesn't know all the detail. Like you've said, they just kind of see Amy as this person who's made great strides toward protecting the people of Gimel. And now she just wants to be with her family. And Victoria is seeming really unreasonable. Like if you don't know the context, right? And it's a fascinating place to put her in. And of course, in the next chapter, we're going to directly confront this idea. But it's happening even now. Sure.
And like the counter to that would be, it was like, well, yeah, but she's got a giant monster that's walking through their city. And it's like, yeah, absolutely, that is happening. But I think from the perspective of someone who sees Amy as kind of like a version of a superhero that is saving millions of people, like if Superman suddenly appeared and was like, okay, there's this giant knight guy, he's mine. I know we're just like walking through the city, but trust me, there's these bad guys over here and my dude can take care of them. Like, you'd be like, well, wait a minute. That doesn't make much sense, Superman. Like, what do you mean? Like, I don't think you would immediately go, oh, Superman's evil. You'd just be like, hold on, dude. What? That doesn't seem to make a lot of sense. Talk me through this.
There's also the element that again, if you're in this room, you don't know the details, and you're kind of biased towards Amy, then you could view this as like she's being basically pushed to do this by the Sheen people, but
Right.
she doesn't want to do this.
Right. And I think I want to zoom into that near the end of this chapter, because I think that is one very interesting thing in which, and I don't know if Amy's doing it intentionally or not, but the ways in which she plays herself in this mediary role between the government of Sheen and the government of Gimel, and her action specifically, is really interesting, I think.
Totally. Yeah. All right. So
there is something I wanted to talk about here, because I just like, we have given Carol a lot of grief throughout the story. But I think I want to give her credit for moments in which I think she's very clever and very good. Like the moments where you see her as like, this is why she was good at law, right? And this is one of those moments, because she's basically asked to speak with Mark and try to get some connection. And the way she speaks with Mark is very specific, because they're just small talking. And Mark asks, "Are you packed up and moved for the evacuation?" And Carol's response is, "Our things are packed. I'm staying at our niece's apartment. We're packing. We saw my sister this morning." And it's very it's trying to bring him back into the fold. It's trying to emphasize subtly the familial connection between them. And she does this throughout the chapter. There's a moment at the end that I really love when she does it, but it's just this clever, like, trying to emphasize, like, you are family, we are family. Like, let's try to do something here.
Yeah. I'm glad you pulled that out, because that totally does have that effect. I mean, the language makes you feel like she's reaching out to him, almost like she's, inviting him, like come back to us. Yeah,
right.
That's beautiful.
I mean, the sentence "I'm staying at our niece's apartment," you could just say "I'm staying with Crystal."
Yeah.
But our niece puts some of that on him. Crystal is your niece too.
Yeah.
And you are part of this family still. Like, stop it.
Yeah. No, that's great. Everything is we, our. Yeah, it's great. I mean, Carol's trying hard here, right? Like, I don't, for all the faults we can usually find in Carol, I don't think there's any particular faults that I can find in these chapters specifically.
Yeah.
So I just want to step back and comment on how just fucking infuriating Amy's style of argumentation is overall. Like, it almost just boils down to an endless series of "no, you, Amy, you did some bad stuff. Well, you let the world in." Like, it's just constantly, and you can see Narwhal just being like, what? How is that a response to what I just?
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, it's whataboutism in the most classic sense of the word, right?
Yeah.
She's not refuting points, she's deflecting them. Also, Amy saying "you let the world end" is like fucking ridiculous. You didn't have any part to play in Gold Morning at all, did you, Amy? Yeah. But I mean, her point summarizes down to, "I'm right because I'm Amy, so you should listen to me." Obviously, that's clear. I'm a good person, ergo, you should listen to the good person.
Yeah. Stop coming up with these annoying arguments that I'm having to find ways to dodge around.
Yeah, no, she's refuting them all. And they're not refuting any of her points, Matt. None of them.
Yeah, so Darnall backs up Victoria's read that Amy is currently riding a high on the feeling of being needed.
Yeah, I love that. I love that recognition, right? That Victoria's like, man, she's kind of acting high. And I want to talk about when she writes it down, though, because I think this is a really great beat where she says, "My hand was shaking too much to clearly put pen to paper. I hadn't realized I was that affected." Fuck you too, pen. Like, on the surface, this is just a nice little comedy beat that also shows how hard this is for Victoria, right? But it's also like Victoria is externalizing here, right? And I don't want to read too much into this. It's just a silly little tiny beat, but it's not the pen's fault. The pen's working fine.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's exactly the headspace she's in, right? Like, right. I don't think you're wrong to read into it, because it's just a sign of a kind of anger motivated reasoning where you would lash out at a pen, and she's gonna do the equivalent of lash out at a pen a whole bunch next chapter.
Yep.
So yeah, worth pointing out, I would say. Yeah. Victoria is aware of how bad it sounds to the people in the room without the context when she says that she thinks she can break Amy and that she came close to doing so back on Sheen. So let's just, there's another beat for us to remember for later, I think.
Yeah, and I think the most important part of this for me is the chapter gives us a little glimpse of how this must sound externally through Crystal, right? Through the unquestionably great and flawless and definitely not bad Crystal. Crystal, who knows what Amy did to Victoria. Crystal has more context than a lot of the people in this room. And yet she still says, to say you'll break someone sounds horrifying, especially someone we once saw as family. So, and that's not to say that it's not going to be necessary to break Amy. That might be exactly what we need to do before the book is done, right? But to Crystal, a person with full context, this still sounds horrifying to her. Imagine what it sounds like to people that don't have that full context. Imagine what it sounds like to them.
Yeah, right. I mean, just to say it out loud, it makes Victoria sound look pretty unhinged.
Yeah,
like she's and she's gonna sound even worse in a minute.
Right. And she's right too. That's the frustrating part. But people do not have that context.
Yeah, it's a kind of aggressive tack that if you were just watching and listening to Amy's tone here, you would be like, wow, that sounds really disproportionate. Like I don't know about that.
Right.
Again, that's the weird thing about like reading these chapters 3 times is like the first time you and I read them, we're like, yeah, sure. Of course you should break her. She sucks.
Yeah.
But then after we like forcibly get the perspective on it, we're like, oh yeah, that comes off a certain way, and then we notice that there's this consistent thing being done in the background of this chapter where a lot of stuff is being framed this way.
Well, and I think one of the things that it makes very clear here is Amy is not speaking that aggressively. She's calm. She's riding a high, it specifically says, so she's very happy and confident. So in this negotiation, you have the calm, confident, patient-looking Amy versus the very upset, visibly shaking, loses her cool, talking about breaking her Victoria. And like Victoria has every right to feel that way. I don't want to make it seem like she's behaving inappropriately, but it's just the question is, what does that look like to people around her? And the text points us towards this, right? I mean, Victoria multiple times throughout the story says something or does something and is like, oh God, there's all these people around and they're hearing me do this or they're seeing me do this. So, I mean, the text is inviting you to think about the thing from their perspective.
Absolutely, yeah. But it's also getting you in the head of this character who they know that they're right, you know that they're right, and experiencing how isolating and demoralizing it is to look around yourself and realize how many people are going to think that you're being unreasonable.
Yeah.
That's to me what is powerful about this.
I totally agree. Yeah, well said. Yeah.
So they decide that at this point, Narwhal mainly decides that Victoria will spearhead the conversation and attempt to manipulate Amy.
I knew this was coming, and I hate it.
Yeah.
I hate Victoria sometimes, Matt. I hate her because I love her, and I know she's going to take this damn bullet. I know she's going to do it. The plan is basically for Victoria to dangle herself in front of Amy and attempt to acquiesce to what she wants the most, right? To manipulate her into a compromise. So basically, the victim of sexual assault is being used as bait against their assaulter. And Victoria is freely doing this to herself because she finds it necessary. And I'm just like, why do you keep putting yourself through these things?
Right.
And so, I mean, of course she does. Of course she's always going to do that. I'm not challenging her character at all. It's just, I'm just like, oh God.
Yeah. Like I said earlier, this is a key core character trait of hers is this self-sacrificing heroism where it's self-sacrificing past the point where any reasonable friend, therapist, or bystander would be like, okay, you're not the person who should be making this sacrifice. Mm-hmm. Like let Narwhal handle it. Maybe she won't do as good a job as you think you could do, but you can tap out. We were talking about this earlier, and I was like, the one piece of advice that people get in martial arts when they're starting is to tap early and often, as in to tap out, to surrender, because if you don't, you're just going to get injured. And Victoria is the queen of just letting her not refusing to tap until her fucking arm has been dislocated.
Yeah.
And like literally, she just keeps getting injured. Right, the whole book, she's been accruing these injuries. You could almost look back over every one of these injuries she's gotten and be like, refusal to tap, refusal to tap, refusal to tap. I mean, metaphorically in some senses, almost literally in some senses. And you said stop doing it to yourself. In a sense, she does do it to herself, because she puts herself into situations past the point of this is going to damage you.
Yeah, and I mean, there's a part of me that finds that admirable, right? Because it's like, wow, you look at that and that's like toughness and strength, right? Is like the person who's going to fall on the grenade. She's always the person who's going to take the hit. But eventually, like you have to go past this idea of unflinching heroism and toughness to like, you're destroying yourself,
right?
Like mentally and physically.
Yeah, I mean, being the person who falls on the grenade is admirable in a kind of high-minded sense, but like you only get to fall on the grenade once.
Mm-hmm.
It's something that you hope you never have to do.
Right.
Yeah.
The ideal situation is that there is no grenade.
Yeah. Or
as Tony Stark says, I think I'll cut the wire. Were you going to go there too?
Yeah, you beat me by 1 second.
Perfect.
To volley the reference. So Victoria then just kind of browbeats Amy into explaining how they built the Gibberim and why they sent him against the machine army specifically. And we get some great background on how and why the machine army is so insidious.
Yeah, which is a lot of fun. Like, I always kind of wondered, is like, what exactly, like, it seems like it's just a lot of robots. We could probably just take all those robots down. But no, they're like multi-dimensional, shifting, impossible to kill robots.
Yeah.
Cool.
Pretty cool, actually.
Yeah, it's really cool.
Yeah.
So what I really like about this, though, is, and this is as we're really starting to ratchet up the tension here, because Victoria is very, very uncomfortable being put in this situation. She's basically, in a sense, giving Amy what she wants: cooperation, a civil conversation, kind of everything Amy was hoping to get back on Shin. Victoria is kind of giving her here, of course, through the phone instead of in person. But Amy can't help but Amy it a little bit here. She doubts Victoria. She criticizes her. She's getting what she wants here, and she can't help but be herself. And sometimes it's like, and now you're going to tell me that I'm wrong? I don't get it. You think you know more than me after what? A day? Half a day? Hours? Amy, stop. You asked for my help. I'm giving it. I can't believe I'm doing it, but here we fucking are. So stop. I just think it's very interesting. And then we also get the moment where she yells at Victoria about hanging out with Tattletale.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because Amy's being, I guess I would say assertive. Like, normally Amy is sort of sullen. Like yeah. She always feels like aggrieved and like she's the victim of everything around her.
Right.
And here we're seeing her where, like, the flip side of this high she's riding is this kind of self-righteousness where she's actually pretty eager to jump on Victoria for perceived slights or underappreciation. And yeah, this moment where she jumps on Tattletale, where she jumps on her about Tattletale is perfectly in line with that, where she almost goes on a short rant about Tattletale, which is not even really on topic.
Yeah, it's also hilarious given the context of who Amy has surrounded herself with.
Yeah.
I mean, so let me preface this with I love my parents very much, but there are moments when, like, my parents are, like, riding me for not hanging out with them enough and for not visiting enough, and then I go visit them, and, like, one of the things that happens is my parents whining at me about some of my life choices, and I'm like, this is why I don't hang out with you. Yeah. And I feel like that's one of the things happening here, right? It's like Amy has been wanting this conversation and wanting this cooperation the whole time. And then the second she gets it, the first thing she's going to do is attack Victoria for her life choices and attack Victoria for the people she's surrounding herself with, and basically venting some of the stuff we heard her talk about in her interludes about what Victoria is doing and the decision she's making. And it's like, this is fucking why, Amy, because you can't just hang out, or you can't just have a civil conversation or cooperate calmly. You have to interject all this other bullshit into it.
Yeah. Yeah. I think we've all been there with family.
Yeah. Sorry, Mom and Dad, if you're listening.
But yeah, I mean, she feels this position of power, and I think that's
and I love that, because I think power dynamics, the shifting of power, is really important to these couple chapters.
Yeah,
and how they change your behavior. But I did want to point out Carol once again here, because in that part I read before where she's yelling at her, saying, "Stop! You asked for my help." There's this tense silence where Victoria says, "Hi, I pushed it with the fucking. I could see it being too informal when this was technically a diplomatic meeting." And then Carol interjects with this moment of, "Listen to your sister," which again, like we talked about before, is trying to specifically point out and draw the familial parallels. But it's also, I think, an important moment, right? Like Carol, who is like doubting Victoria throughout the early part of the book and doubting Victoria's read on Amy, and specifically rejecting and telling her she's wrong, is now in a situation where she's listening to the whole thing, and the thing she says is, "Listen to your sister, Amy. Listen to your sister." She is showing Amy, showing Victoria, showing everyone here that she is on Victoria's side in this.
Yeah. And Carol's also being smart. She's leveraging this idea that you're allowed to lean on these family connections. In Sheen, again, like she used all this we us language. She's using family language here. And of course is a kind of tacit way of saying, like, we are all a family. You are one of us. We have not abandoned or outcast you. You don't need to feel that way. You don't need to have your back up like this. Just relax and listen to Victoria.
Yeah.
So Victoria tries so hard to remain civil, to keep an even tone, and we're aware of that being in her head. But Amy pushes her one too many times, and she finally loses it. She snarls at her, calls her a miserable, deluded little monster, threatens her with imminent death if anybody speaks. And overall, not her best moment.
Nope.
And I mean, we feel for her. It's almost satisfying, actually, like in the same sense that it's satisfying to just like finally snap and just rage at the person who really deserves it. But it's just not a good showing, for the people in this room, especially those lacking the context, as we've said repeatedly.
Yeah, I agree. It feels cathartic in this moment. This stuff has been building internally throughout the chapter, and finally she gets to externalize it. Finally, she gets to call Amy out directly and say what she's been thinking and say how she's been feeling. And there's that definite moment of relief and release. This tension has been released now. She said it. But you're right. What does this look like to everyone else? What does this look like to people who don't understand? Like, why specifically is it going to push you, Victoria, that far to where you said, if you talk to anyone else but me, I'm going to leave this room, I'm going to fly up really high in the air, and I'm going to drop something on you, and you won't even see it coming.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, like, from a writing perspective, Wild Bill could have stopped short of having Victoria threaten her with death in front of everyone. But he didn't do that. Like that, and that looks super bad. Like even to the people in her, and then, a couple paragraphs later, Victoria points out to herself, like, yep, I'd probably permanently damage my reputation with people in this room.
Yep.
As somebody who's going to fly off the handle and make death threats in the middle of an international interplanetary negotiation Skype call. It's horrible, right? Like, it's horrible that this has happened to her.
Yeah.
And,
oh yeah.
And it sucks.
It does. It absolutely sucks. I feel for her. I love that she did it, but it's also like, oh no, what'd you do?
Yeah. So it works though.
Yeah, it does work.
It works, and that might be a slight silver lining that like somebody like Narwhal acknowledges that the strategy worked. But yeah, like she gets through to her. She persuades Amy to send the Mother of Mothers instead of the Gibborim, because there's less risk based on Victoria's understanding of powers, at least.
Yeah,
So,
and as you said at the beginning of the show, it does another very important thing because Amy needs to be out in the field to make sure that Mother of Mother's children's children are behaving properly. So what Victoria has managed to do here is put Amy on the chessboard. She's out there on the board, and now it's even easier to fly above her and drop a rock on her, or something.
But on the flip side, she has like a whole bunch of giant minions now. So
yeah, that's true. That's true. One thing I want to note here is what we kind of talked about before, is that whether this was intentional or not, the agreement that Amy comes to with Victoria is specifically against what Luis and the government of Sheen wants to do, right? There's this moment here where it says specifically, I could hear the exchange of words. Luis was pissed. So, to the people in this room, you have this threat marching across Gimel, and you have Sheen and Amy at the beginning of this conversation aligned regarding this plan. This is Amy's monsters under the direction of the government of this other dimensionary world, and they're aligned against you, or not technically against you, but in all intents and purposes, yes. But by the end of this conversation, Amy agrees to a compromise with Victoria and with Gimel, and she does so specifically against the wishes of the Sheen government. So from the perspective of, let's say, someone who doesn't know near much about Amy as we do, what do we see here? We see Amy compromising, and we see Sheen and the government of Sheen as the main aggressors then. They wouldn't have made this deal. Amy made this deal. Amy agreed to this compromise. The hero Amy, the woman who negotiated the acceptance of refugees, made Sheen take the refugees in, the woman who is healing them of their illnesses and giving them these antibodies which will allow them to live without illness. The woman who took all the Gimel villains when no one else would. She just stood up to the warmongering, cape-hating Sheen to reach a compromise that staved off war. Now, of course, we know better.
Right.
We know they got here because Victoria knows her sister and was smart enough to play to her disgusting wants and manipulate her to this compromise. We know that while Sheen certainly does want this war, Amy has her own goals, and those goals are not in alignment with Gimel as a whole. We know this. Victoria knows this. Some of the people in this room, including I think Narwhal by now, knows this. But what about everybody else?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, yeah. So it's just basically setting up, right? Setting up for the next chapter, and what the reaction
I
is
think
gonna
so.
be.
Yeah.
And I mean, I think this is not just being set up for the next chapter. My suspicion is this is being set up for the coming chapters. We have this situation now where we strongly suspect that by the end of this, this podcast, we will know that Victoria has been benched. Mm-hmm. I can't help but anticipate that a big part of that was threatening to murder the lead negotiator and important power player of the other side of this conflict. Mm-hmm. Like you can't imagine putting her out in the field on the same field as Amy after what she just said, right?
Yeah.
And that's rational, right? Like if you're looking at this from a third person point of view and you don't really know what's going on, but one person is yelling and threatening to kill the other, you kind of want to put that person in a room over here and let them cool off.
Yeah.
So, it's setting the stakes, or setting the stage rather, for I think what's going to be coming in the next few chapters.
I totally agree.
So at this point, Victoria starts to unload her how horrible she's feeling when Darnall and Jessica approach her. And just as she gets ahead of steam, Jessica puts on the brakes and says she can't be a support. So again, in this arc, we have connections being denied. And Victoria attempts to connect. Jessica's basically like, no, not going to connect. Sorry, can't. And Victoria lashes out in the end, mentioning Bonesaw. But before Jessica has a chance to respond, Kronos attacks the Gibborim.
Oh, yeah.
Yep. And yeah.
I really like this. So, I mean, we see the way that Darnall and Jessica approach her is described as they intercept her like the Dauntless Titan and accompanying Seamerg seem to be intercepting the Chevalier. So she's drawing a connection between these two giant monsters, like in this inevitable conflict between her therapists walking up to her. And it makes it so... It makes it very clear that from the start, this is going to be a confrontational conversation. Any way it goes down, it's going to be confrontational because she's framing it in a confrontational way. And I think it's very, very well done. I like that a whole lot.
Yeah, yeah. No, I like it. I love it. I mean, this is really heartbreaking, the way this chapter ends, because Victoria, this is some great writing where it's just like this really long paragraph of Victoria just, again, unloading how horrible this has been for her.
Yeah.
And like, it's like the feeling of like you finally want to unburden yourself, and then the person who you feel like who you thought you were unburdening yourself to is like, no, I can't really talk right now.
Yeah, she's desperately reaching out at this point to anyone. I mean, she is not comfortable with Darnall. She says specifically, I don't remember if it's this chapter or next chapter, but she says specifically, I don't like that guy. I respect him, but I don't like him.
Yeah.
But she's reaching out even to him at this point. Anyone, like these people, please let me talk to you. Let me help me. Like, and she's just not getting it. And
Yep.
Yeah.
All right, let's move on into 17.6, where everything will just turn around and get better.
It's gonna be so much better.
Yeah.
Like crazy better. That's what happens at Sundown. Things get better.
Yep. So the chase continues with Dauntless blasting away at the Jaborim with his arc lance, the Simurgh riding forebodingly on his shooting arm limb. The chapter opens with a relatively long and awesome depiction of these titanic monsters, including the real Chevalier, fighting their way through the city.
My boy.
Yeah. Speaking of Chevalier, like, I don't know. Sometimes I'm good at visualizing things. Sometimes I'm not. This was, for some reason, the descriptions of Chevalier, like ninjaing his way through the city using his cannon blade, kind of made something click for me. And I was like retroactively able to like re-visualize him fighting during, the Behemoth fight and the Echidna fight, and be like, oh, okay, I think I see what that's supposed to look like now.
Yeah.
I don't know why exactly. I mean, perhaps it's just Wildbow's like just literally better at writing now, and seeing Chevalier move around using Wildbow circa 2019 allowed me to be like, oh, okay, like that description works for me perfectly. And I get it.
Sure.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I liked it. I think my favorite part of this was the Simurgh riding on his arm, and the text description here is really great because it's like her hair is like billowing in the wind, and it's like this like victory pose where she's just like it's really, really great.
Yeah,
I like it a whole bunch.
Me too, totally. So this chapter,
it's the fucking Simurgh.
Yeah, right. It's this terrifying thing, and it's like, you can hear Flight of the Valkyries playing as she rides to her, destiny.
Exactly.
So this chapter, as with the last, is punctuated with Victoria pressing her raw nail bed into her flesh, which is a kind of passive, distracting self-harm and something that she's been doing a whole bunch lately.
Yeah, I mean, I love it. And we've talked about it before, but I love that you brought it up again because it's just remarkable in its simplicity, this imagery. Like, it's just, you establish a symbol once. You establish a symbol and what it means to your character, and then you can just call back to it again and again easily, economically, and you get across everything you need to. Like, all you have to do is have a sentence like, oh, she pushes her finger in again and feels the sharp pain, and you're like, oh, okay, we're right back into that mindset again. Yeah,
and she's doing it at specific times. She's doing it to punctuate moments of fuck this, basically.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah, it's I mean, you could almost incorporate this into the same idea of all of these italicized kind of mental rebuttals to things. It's a kind of refusal. It's a kind of objection.
Yeah. And one thing she's doing during all this is looking out on the conference room, on the war room, and observing people. She says specifically to herself, pay attention to the beats that land, the moments of impact, the key elements in the flow of it all. And what she sees is tension, agitation, people writing things down, scenario leaning forward, taking over the comms. What little I could make out of her voice was more familiar, casual. It made me think more of me talking to a member of Breakthrough than me talking to Natalie, which is specific Natalie erasure here, Victoria.
Yeah.
We've talked over and over again about how Natalie has earned her spot as a member of Breakthrough. But in this specific instance, she makes her distinct from Breakthrough in that way. And I low-key think that's important because I think that's setting us up for this. The main idea of this passage is Victoria's abandonment of humans as a consideration and a connection. Yeah, exactly.
Right. I mean, that I think there's a lot to that, and we may have a chance to talk about this later, but when she came out of Shardville, her main anchor, maybe it's going too far to call it that, but it seems like one of her main anchors is, I want to save the people of this city. It was the only statement she could say and sound confident. And okay, who are the people of this city? Well, almost entirely normal humans.
Yep.
And I feel like the main thing that happens in this chapter in particular is this erosion of her sense of connection to normal humans.
Yeah.
Again, that like you're absolutely right. This mention of Natalie here is very pointed. Just somebody in the Discord is pointing out how many times in the story where Victoria has been like, and today was the day Natalie Matheson became a member of Breakthrough, and like she always fucking forgets that, and it just goes back to just, oh yeah, that's Natalie. Yeah, she's wearing an ugly coat again.
Yeah,
I mean, it's so intentional and it's so great, right? And here it is again, really underlining this thing that's happening with your character.
Yeah, it's really a perfect way to prime her for everything else that's going to happen in this chapter.
Yeah.
I love it. I love it so much.
Yeah. So yeah, Victoria has hung around this situation room long after her family and most of the other capes have left. On her way out, Scenarial points Victoria to get debriefed by Eric, who Victoria immediately dislikes. She very comprehensively looks him over and notes such tiny details as a smudge on the tip of his wingtip shoe. She then gets really mad when he does the same to her, despite him having just been ordered to look after her.
Yeah, I think it is important to say that he does take a look at her boobs for what she describes as half a second too long.
Yeah.
And then gives her direct eye contact. Victoria does point out that her instincts are bad right now. She compares this specifically to how Byron checked her out when they first met, but Byron had the decency to look away when caught. This guy seemingly doesn't. She takes a dislike to this guy immediately, and that only is kind of reinforced in her mind as we go through this.
I mean, the italic beat reaction thing is only doubles down throughout this chapter for sure.
Yeah, I like the description of Eric a whole lot because I think it's very interesting. She does give him a full up and down, and we know that because we see her describe his nose and his feet. And those are the two ends of your body. So it is literally a full up and down. But the way she describes him as this perfectly dressed suit, right? He's wearing purple, which is purple, it has a royal connotation, right?
Yeah.
He has the suit. She doesn't describe this. She describes him as good looking. Presumably his suit fits him perfectly. I see it as like a very well-tailored suit. He's got brown hair with like the blonde highlights. The only blemish on him is a little scuff on his fancy shoe that she says is probably like kicking open a dirty door or something like that. And so he's prim, he's like proper, he's neat. And this is part of a narrative that's being built of this person who a suit. I mean, the idea of describing someone as a suit has derogatory, negative connotation,
it's
right?
Dehumanizing.
Yeah. So, yeah. This is Eric.
Yeah.
Hello, Eric.
Hello, Eric. Hello, Victoria's internal representation of Eric, and who Victoria thinks Eric is, based on very little evidence.
Yeah.
So, Scott, let's be clear about this from the outset. I'm not really very interested in litigating whether or not Eric is or is not a sleazy dude. I mean, maybe he has 10 rescue dogs that he saved from Bet, and he sends all of his earnings to his aged grandmother. On the other hand, maybe he's exactly as odious as Victoria feels that he is in this moment. As usual, I'm more interested in the why of it, the purpose and function of this character, of this element in the text. And that's what we're going to focus on.
Yeah, absolutely. We had a big, long discussion about this in the Doof Discord the other day, and I actually really enjoyed the conversation. It allowed me to really clarify and crystallize my feelings about this character, and here they are. I'm going to say them once, and then we don't have to say them again. I think Eric's a bit of a prick, who I think starts this conversation enjoying being put in this position of power over a cape. He is an intern who probably has not gotten to do this very often, and he has now been placed into this power position. He's the one that gets to decide whether or not really, but in his mind, he's the one who gets to decide whether Amy or Victoria is ready for service or not. And he kind of relishes this power position a little bit. But as we'll try to outline going forward, I think Victoria uses his general prickishness and her overall bias against humans and the shitty headspace she's in right now to assume the worst about everything. And that is the important part, I think. You're absolutely right. Not the literal, is this guy good or bad, but how Victoria reacts to it and how it leads her down a path of further isolation.
Right.
That is the important part.
Yeah, and that's what we'll focus on. It is a bit fun to consider that, like, his smiles that she reads as being douchey are actually like out of nervousness, but
sure.
But like that's kind of a background element that's fun to consider after you've read it a bunch of times. I think like you've said, more salient to talk about what is this saying about Victoria and where she is at. So yeah. So in this chapter, as the last the last chapter and really most of the arc so far, we continue with this beat comment structure, and it becomes really pronounced here. Almost every utterance of Eric is colored by Victoria's immediate scathing internal criticism, sometimes italic, sometimes not italic. But if we just look at this internal monologue, Victoria is in a shitty mood. I'm just going to pull some things out. It sounded like none of your business. Not really. Talking about Amy is a really shitty start to any dialogue. So you're one of the people who took my spot at the university. That's just some of them. There's more. Eventually she gets to this internal story about how she could easily just sneak outside and go murder Amy and probably get away with it and not even get too bad of consequences. And then, the stuff that isn't italicized is pretty much just as bad. She'll say stuff like, definitely no fucking benefit of the doubt now. This wasn't the fucking venue or time. And then he says, I forget what he says exactly. Oh yeah, he says that he prides himself on being able to take others' perspectives. And then she says, okay, fuck this, fuck him.
It's so venomous. It's so angry. I enjoy it a whole lot. Yeah. I really do enjoy it. She's just pissed. I mean, it's just like, fuck you, Pen. It's basically an extension of fuck you too, Pen.
Precisely, yeah. And it is fun to get swept up into her angry mindset and just kind of unloading. She's not literally unloading on the guy because most of this is internalized and just silent fuming. Although she is kind of, she's rude to him. She speaks to him in a way that she wouldn't speak to any of her teammates. Yeah. But it's not. She's not swearing at him though. So
sure.
Yeah. So, but yeah, overall, there's this this driving anger, this judgment, and I think in a word, uncharitability. She goes so far as to think to herself that Eric, and I think also his friend LaRue gets wrapped up in this too, although I'm not 100% sure, that they're just so blasé about the imminent end of the world because how could they get it? They're not parahumans.
Yeah. I think we're seeing here that even the creepy leering aside, she is making assumptions about how this man handles trauma, right? She assumes the smiles, she assumes the jokes show blasé indifference. She assumes that she doesn't see any of the threats of the end of the world as real threats to him because he's talking about how he has more time to go on dates with the school closed. And this could very much just be things that he's doing to avoid dealing with the fact that the world might end tomorrow.
Right.
But the one specific thing that he does is defend Amy, right? In a certain way. Like he says, he says that I think she is someone that could be coming from the right place and making the wrong decisions, basically. And that's a very extremely charitable read of Amy, and not one that I think is correct. But I think the fact that the book goes out of its way to show us that Eric does not have all the context. He is not aware of the history of Victoria and Amy. He is not aware of the full extent of what Amy has done and is doing. And like we noted in the last chapter, there is a view of what goes down in that situation that could be read to be extremely bad look Victoria, good look Amy.
Yeah.
And I think that's where he's coming from. And he's wrong. He's wrong. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I don't want to defend his opinion, but I see where it's coming from. And her understanding, I mean, look what she calls it. She says that given context, what he says about Amy is more vulgar than if he whipped out his dick and slow wanked it in front of me while talking about his technique. Look, holy shit.
Yeah.
I mean, and she even notes, like, given context, right? Context that we know he doesn't have.
Right.
So
yeah. But I mean, the effect here, again, to reemphasize, is that Victoria feels like this guy who is basically a stand-in for humanity,
right?
Doesn't understand, is speaking out of his ass, and is just like this kind of know-it-all, doesn't actually know anything though, and basically shouldn't even be here. This guy shouldn't even be in this room. What the fuck does he know?
Right.
And that's her feeling, which, I mean, I don't think we're wrong in saying that he's the stand-in for humanity, that this is meant to erode her connection to humanity.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's textual. She says, is this what humanity is?
Yes.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think you're right. And I think this is the most important part of this whole thing we're talking about to me, not the specifics of Eric. Fuck Eric and prick. I don't care about him. She thinks, is this what humanity is? And then says to herself, no. There's other people. There's Presley. There's Jester. There's these other people, Natalie. There's the other people in my life. Those are humanity and those are good too. And then she recalls what has become a really important focal point in the story for us. We've gone back to it several times, that moment where Vicky makes the argument to Ashley that interactions with the humans, with people like Presley, matter. She argues that this matters, and Swansong listens to her. And I think you could make a case that part of Swansong's transformation, part of her ascension, was because she took this advice to heart in a certain way. Mm-hmm. But now, here in Arc 17, what does Victoria think when she thinks about those connections, about those people? She thinks, except floundering, I wanted to reach out for them because I needed them. I found them wanting. I found them lacking. That's it. That's what's happening here now. What's happening here now is that thing which she thought was so important is now no longer sufficient. It is not giving her what she wanted from it anymore.
And I think that those connections were part of a whole, and they served a very important purpose when she had a lot of other things to rely on, but they can't be the only thing she has left. And I think that right now she feels like that's almost the only thing she has left.
Yeah.
And
it's gone.
Yeah.
It's gone.
Yeah. So, or I guess you could even phrase it as like she tried to set her weight down on the one thing that she thought was remaining and realized that it couldn't hold up her weight. And so she's just free falling basically.
Yep.
Yeah. So, and to reiterate what I said a minute ago, I want to save the people of this city. Well, these are the people of this city. They're lacking. They're wanting. They're not worth saving, maybe. And
yeah, she doesn't go that far, but you can see the line to that, right? Yeah. There's a dotted line to that thought, and it seems like she's moving towards getting there.
Yeah, and if that's if that's her anchor, I mean that's real bad.
Yep.
So the subsequent interaction with LaRue, is that how you say that? LaRue.
Sure.
Creates some interesting contrasts to the interaction with Eric. Eric comes across much better than Eric did. And, he starts out by thanking her, giving her credit for getting through the difficult interaction with her sister. And, I don't know. It's interesting. I'm still struggling to say what is the textual purpose of contrasting LaRue with Eric exactly.
I mean, is it interesting, right? And I mean, if you look how they're described, they are almost polar opposites, right? Eric is wearing this tailored, nice suit, wingtip shoes, the light purple shirt. LaRue on the other, Eric is said to be good looking. LaRue, on the other hand, is described as square face, red cheeks, balding. His suit jacket doesn't fit him, and like, so I think things traditionally that Victoria would go like, ew,
right.
But Eric holds a position of power over Victoria, right? He is analyzing her. He is assessing her. LaRue is not. And LaRue is immediately almost reverential to her. The first thing he says to her is, thank you. Thank you for what you do, which is a kind thing to do. I don't want to take that away from him. That's a nice thing to say. You see someone's having a tough time and you thank them. But it is interesting to look at the humans that Victoria ends up liking versus the humans that Victoria ends up hating. And the humans that Victoria ends up liking tend to be the humans that are reverential to the power of capes.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. I don't think that's unfair. I mean, she's positively predisposed toward Guy, who is immediately deferent to her and kind of implicitly gives her power over him. And, you know, like literally is like, I'll go get you some coffee. Like that's almost a symbol for subservience, right?
Sure.
Like I'm gonna go for a coffee. Want some coffee? Victoria wants some coffee. My treat, right? It's that
is the rightful place, and not, this is not textual, right? I don't want to say like she's actually thinking this, but it almost seems like that is the rightful place of humanity, right? Running to get me a coffee, thanking me for my service. And bringing me a drink.
I mean, I feel like in the mood she's in, like a normal Victoria. No, this Victoria, yeah, maybe.
Sure.
I feel like that's the headspace she's in right now. And interestingly, it's after this interaction with LaRue, much more positive interaction, that she goes on this mental tangent where she like seriously considers that she could sneak out, murder Amy, and probably only get, a slap on the wrist for it.
Yeah, I mean, it's so interesting, right?
Yeah.
Because this is not, I can't do this because it would be a bad thing to do. It would be the wrong thing to do. I don't want to do this. It's wrong and unhealthy. In the very last chapter, when talking about justification versus justice, Victoria said, I want to kill her. I want to torture her, but the right thing to do is to lock her up, get her help.
Yeah.
One chapter later, it seems like the only thing she's concerned about at that point is if she did that, she'd get in trouble for it.
Yeah.
So far as to say, like, to muse on what would happen. I'd probably get some consideration for mental stress. I mean, my therapist would probably testify on my behalf, which I don't know if he would, Victoria.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it is very interesting that like nowhere in this scenario that she played on her head is, no, I can't do that. It's wrong. Which, I mean, look, sometimes like everyone I think has had moments in their head where they've like said, yeah, it'd sure be nice to do this thing that I definitely can't do because that's absolutely unacceptable. But it is interesting to kind of see the change from that would not be justice to I'd get in trouble.
Well, there have been a lot of lines crossed. I mean, it wasn't until fairly recently that she actually was able to think to herself, I hate Amy.
Yeah.
And then to get to a point where she just started to allow herself to like sort of think these fleeting thoughts of like, man, I'd sure feel better if she was just dead. Like, it would be really great if she just died. I would feel relieved. Like, it was a big thing. I remember her admitting to herself that it would be a relief if she was dead. Now she's fantasizing. Like, this isn't idle. This is, I mean, I could fly out there right now. Same portal I used to get to the fight with Damsel and Deathchester would put me close. I could go to her and I could erase her from consideration. Very pragmatic. The details are there. It's like she's gotten. The only thing that's missing is picking out the murder weapon. It's chilling, actually, right? Like as much as Amy deserves it, it's chilling.
Yeah, and I think I'm glad I felt the need to hedge myself a little bit here. I don't know why, but I think that as much as Amy deserves it is an important point. I don't think either of us are saying that this is bad, right? We're not. I don't think I'm making a moral judgment on whether or not Amy deserves to live or not anymore. My point is, it's a shift in Victoria's attitude.
I'm being a bit ridiculous. Like, I still don't believe in the death penalty. I still believe that Amy should be locked up and like, there's no point in torturing people. Like, that's not I'm while I have backed a bit away from being a utilitarian in the classical sense, I still don't think there's any point in torturing someone for having done something bad. But yeah, something needs to happen to Amy.
Yeah,
right?
She needs to be taken out of the ability to do harm.
Yes, exactly.
That's the most important thing.
Exactly.
And if the only way to do that is to kill her, that's a bummer.
Yeah.
But it might be necessary. Yes. I don't think that's the value judgment we're making here. It's just that Victoria has moved to, I could do this, and the only reason I won't is because I get in trouble.
Right. Premeditation for something she hasn't quite worked herself up to. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So after LaRue walks away, Victoria bats / knocks / brushes / swats Eric's hand aside with her force field.
Mm-hmm.
So now she's used her power to intimidate a person, and her mental attitude about this is that he had it coming. And I think there's a few things to talk about here in this moment. One of them is that she's mega proud to have had that much control over her force field. So here's the thing about that. She didn't have control. She didn't mean to do that. That was not control. That was waste reaching through the veil and doing something unbidden. And at this point, it's like the line between the two of them is disappearing.
Yeah, and I like that. I think it's interesting how she frames it, though. I am inclined to agree with you that she didn't necessarily have control in the moment, but how she frames it is, I'd meant to do that and I hadn't. So I both meant to do that. I both meant to block it with the wretch. I both meant to meant my force field in that moment, and I hadn't, which is like, I kind of had control. But if you only kind of have control, it means you don't have control, right?
I mean, it's a miles of difference between swatting away a rude person's hand with your hand and breaking the explicit prohibition against using your power and doing it with your dangerous murder force field, which maims people accidentally all the time.
I mean, she reinforces in the text that it was gentle, right? So there is a level of control here. She does not hurt him.
Yeah. I hate to make the parallel, but like Amy was just talking about like, I'm in control, and here Victoria's getting this a high off of the idea that she has this control, which is really not control.
Yeah. And I think we need to say, like, Eric reached out from her, like, from the perspective, like the corner of her eye, reached out and tried to grab her to get her attention, right? And that is not a good thing to do. Especially to people who, like Victoria, are very shaky and like she's not in a good place right now. So someone like reaching out of her periphery and trying to grab her is a specific trigger. But I do think that it's important that the book makes sure to define that Eric is an intern who has only been doing this job for a month. He has not been around capes very often. And maybe he shouldn't be here. Maybe he shouldn't have been given this responsibility. I think that's fair to say. But he didn't know. And I understand why she did it. I totally get it. But she broke the rules. She used her power. Eric had power in the situation, right? Eric, by assessing her, had the power over her, and she kind of, in this moment, evened the scales by terrifying him.
I mean, I would view it as he is now scared of her after this point. He has like detected, finally, it kind of, maybe you could phrase it as, it's finally gotten through his thick skull that she's in a volatile place right now. I mean, it's as if, I think personally it's a bit of a faux pas to touch someone who you don't know that well.
Absolutely.
So like if I were to like, it's on the same order as if like you commit the faux pas of reaching out to like touch someone to get their attention and they slap your hand away. now they have done something that crossed a line in response to you doing a more minor faux pas. So now it's just a fucked up situation. And
Well, and
yeah.
I wonder if Eric knows about Carol. Like he seems to have very little limited knowledge about all the players here.
Yeah.
I wonder if he knows what Victoria accidentally did to Carol. And,
Probably
I mean,
not.
that's got to make him terrified.
Yeah.
He probably doesn't, but generally that's going to be a terrifying thing because you're just standing there and then an invisible force moves your hand away.
Yeah.
And it's just like, what? Whoa.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think, like, I don't want to say like she's wrong for stopping someone from doing an office place faux pas, like, but the way she did it did break specific rules she was ordered to do, and as you said, she does not have control. She does not have complete control. She's proud that she didn't snap his hand off with the wretch in that moment, which good. I'm glad,
Right.
but the idea that she didn't mean 100% to do that is not control.
Yeah. And I think the Victoria of a few arcs ago just wouldn't have felt good about having done that anyway.
Yeah.
Like it wouldn't be a victory. It wouldn't be a win. It would be oh man, I overreacted to that.
Mm-hmm.
So Victoria then proceeds to give some pretty good assessments of the state of Breakthrough. Although at this point, I'm forced to wonder if her reads aren't wrong in interesting ways because of how much I feel this arc is putting us in a position of Victoria's instincts are off and her interpretations of things are off and her self-trust isn't there. That said, I still think that her reads on Amy and on family and on Breakthrough are probably supposed to be reliable. But the thing is, I don't know. The book has injected a lot of uncertainty into things, and I feel like at this moment we are at peak unreliable narrator.
I think we are and we aren't. I think there are very specific things we can absolutely 100% trust Victoria's point of view on. And there are other things that I'm not sure we can. I think capes generally, her team specifically, Amy specifically, are things that I think the book has showed us time and time again. I am most confident in her read on, even in these moments. So I do agree that this book hasn't delved in unreliable narrator very often, and this seems to be a place where it's inviting us to question some of the stuff, but I do think those truisms remain. I think her assessment of Breakthrough, her assessment of her family and of Amy remain very accurate.
Yeah. I think you're right.
And capes as a whole. I think the unreliable narrator starts when we start talking about those pesky people without powers.
Yeah. Right. I mean, I guess I'm just referring to this idea back all the way in the Shard world where I started to suspect that maybe the interpretations of the Tattletale Crystal Visions were kind of off base, and now I'm like, maybe more things are off base in subtle, interesting ways. I don't think I'm entirely wrong, and you were the one who actually noticed this thing that we're going to talk about in about 60 seconds.
Sure.
But because of the fact that she's really pretty blind to her own current state.
Yeah. I think you're like Breakthrough, Amy, her family, spot on.
Yeah.
Assessing Victoria, not so great.
0 out of 10.
Yeah.
So as she goes through the team, I mean, the first thing I thought was funny is that she's asked about Capricorn, and in her answer, she basically just talks about Tristan. I guess there's like a line in there you could take as being kind of about Byron, but she's asked about Capricorn. Everything is about Tristan. She's kind of erasing Byron from existence with this answer, which, you go ahead and start and elaborate on your thing, because I want to talk about that in context of your observation.
Okay, sure. One of the things, the end of this conversation is she's asked to give strengths and concerns or weaknesses. And at the end of it all, she says, by the way, Eric asks her to assess herself, admitting that it's going to be not objective. And she says how she's feeling. And then she says, all the strengths that I just listed for my teams, I think those are my strengths too. That's what she says. And I like this. I think she's right. I think it's accurate. I think it's in line with what's been true for the entire book, that the members of Breakthrough are reflective of Victoria in a lot of specific ways. But if it's true on the strength side, it's true on the weaknesses side as well. And when you look through what she notes as the weaknesses of her team, you do start to draw a line, right? For Capricorn, she says specifically no weaknesses are concerns, but in her description of Tristan, she mentions that he is very aggressive at times. For Sveta, she says she holds a grudge and she's new to her body. For Rain, she says he doesn't believe in himself for very much. For Kenzie, she says the biggest concern would be a mental breakdown. And she says that's not very likely. She'd have to feel like she has nobody. I don't think she's anywhere near that yet. But Victoria's very near that. She is systematically being yanked away from or cutting ties with the people that she has around her. So all of these things, all of these bits, all of these weaknesses very, very much tie into Victoria's weaknesses as well. And I find that really fascinating because she specifically notes the strengths.
Yeah.
And leaves the weaknesses off the table.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's interesting. So I guess the idea that she sort of erases Byron from consideration is like maybe Byron's strengths are not strengths that she shares. Byron's weaknesses are not weaknesses that she shares, and so he's kind of invisible to her in this moment. I'm not sure.
I like that. Yeah.
There's also just kind of the fact that Tristan is like the big loud guy that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The issue of the Tristan Byron relationship has always been that he's the one that naturally draws more attention to himself just by his personality. Right. Yeah.
So I adore that. I love that she accidentally gets a good read on herself, but is not aware of it.
Yeah. I mean, it really linked up to me when I first saw the Sveta one, the idea of she holds a grudge and is new to her body. I mean, just aligns perfectly. Yeah. Because Victoria is relatively new to this body. Definitely Victoria is known to hold grudges for sure.
Yeah. Yep. I love it. So after this, she leaves the Situation Room and Jessica joins her to explain the situation with Bonesaw. Jessica explains that she became suspicious that Riley had kidnapped one of the survivors who had disappeared, and then she misread Riley's reaction to her suspicion. The situation escalated to violence, though the violence can be read mostly as Riley defending herself against Jessica in an overly aggressive way.
Yeah, and this is one of those really tragic stories, right? Because we learn that basically what happened was exactly what Amy predicted or made a self-fulfilling prophecy by saying it to Jessica. Jessica, once all this happened, was put in charge of making sure everything goes well. She was second in command and responsible for keeping up the mental health of a group of people stranded in the middle of nowhere, struggling to survive. Basically, she was put in charge of a Lord of the Flies situation, except some of those flies are super powerful supervillains, and it's crazy. And eventually she just snaps. It's too much on her, and she just snaps and attacks Riley.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting because I still feel like the idea that we should be suspicious of those visions from the Tattletale Shard has been somewhat supported by this, because yes, that did happen, but Victoria did draw the wrong conclusion. Bonesaw is not dead. In fact, this, kind of the kind of instant reaction you get from what Victoria saw was like Jessica freaking losing it and trying to murder her, and it was more like maybe Jessica like grabbed her arm, and then Bonesaw grabbed her back, and then her muscles went crazy, and then it escalated in kind of a unfortunate, sad, natural way into strangulation. Not just like Victoria, Jessica snapping and going apeshit. So I just to call back to that thing where we're still tracing both the veracity and the drawn implications from those crystal visions. I think that this goes in the column of veracity, yes, implication drawn, no.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think you're right. And it's sad because like this is to Jessica, this is a complete failure. She was put in charge of ensuring the mental health of these people and she failed them. And one of the results is Riley says, I'm not going back.
Yeah.
Like the idea that Jessica thought this, and there is evidence here that like Bonesaw might be going through some regression as well. Like it's probably a high stakes, very intense, stressful situation for everyone because she says Riley had kind of reverted to some of her childish tendencies, her bonesaw-iness, and that's part of what made Jessica start to suspect her, that she's backsliding a little bit. But the end result is Riley just being like, I'm done. I give up. I'm not going to try. Like, I'm leaving society. I'm going to stay here on my own because you lacked the faith in me, and that devastates me. And that's tragic. I feel so bad about everyone involved here. It sucks.
Yeah, because I mean, on the one hand, like, come on, Jessica, give yourself like a break. This is Bonesaw. The fact that you made the progress you did is amazing. And then on Bonesaw's side, I mean, it is kind of insane that we've built up all this empathy with Bonesaw. But we do feel bad for her too, right? Like at this point, she feels like the only real option for her is self-imposed exile.
Yeah. Which is a bummer. Yeah. Hey, so speaking of, this is exactly what Amy predicted. During this conversation, we learn that it was Amy's message / very clear threat to Jessica that it, at the very least, contributed to Jessica bringing aboard guest speakers and other things to her therapy groups, aka the reason why Victoria is even a member of Breakthrough is because of what Amy said to Jessica. And this is interesting, and I want to explore this a little bit because one of the comments we got last week on last week's episode was from someone called Lone Wolf 8424 who pointed out to us that if Amy and Amy's violation of Victoria back on Shin is the thing that opened the door to Victoria's increased control of her power, that theory that you and I discussed in detail last week, then the story would basically be giving credit to Amy for Victoria's progress and how that feels wrong and bad. And it's a great comment. I totally agree that would feel a little icky if what is happening to Victoria ends up being the key to her recovery and that door was opened via a second violation by Amy. That would feel icky. I agree with that. It's a great comment. But with that comment in mind, I read this part and that made me think of this because this is almost one of the inciting incidents of the entire book, right? This is what gets Victoria down this path, meeting this group of people. And now that is at least a little bit tainted by Amy's influence.
Totally.
And I think that plays into Victoria's feelings of isolation because now Breakthrough, she's already separate from them. And now her interaction with them, the team aspect, the friendship, everything that's happened with all these people is tainted because she knows it's partially because of what Amy did.
Yep.
Amy pushed this towards this, and that is further isolating for her, even more so than she already was. Now they're tainted too, and it's awful. It's awful.
Yeah, and you know, in context of that comment that you referred to, if all that she ends up with remaining is her contact with her shard, and then she realizes that even that is Amy tainted, then she just has nothing.
Yeah.
And that's horrible. And that's horrible in exactly the kind of way that you want out of a good story. I mean,
I like your little pre-laugh there as you realized you were just going to say something entirely true but totally heartless.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, it's just fun when you switch between the mode of like remembering that this is a story and forgetting it's a story and being right there with the characters. So yeah.
No, I agree.
So yeah, I mean, this conversation in the end, Victoria has this little shred of hope, this little shred of a possible connection, because she asks if Jessica triggered, and then Jessica says no, and Victoria's reaction is, and hopes were dashed. Jessica was out of reach.
Yeah, and this is this is why the Eric part is in the story. This is the natural culmination of the moment where Victoria basically says, I found humans wanting. Is this moment where maybe there's hope, maybe there's someone I can still reach out to, maybe there's someone I can still lean on to support me. If only Jessica was a cape, she would understand, she would know, and I would have a connection. But nope, she's just a human, and therefore she's out of reach. And the use of reach there is important, right? Because that mantra, reach out, that's such an important part of Victoria's character. And so to say out of reach is very specifically calling back to that.
Yeah. Yeah. I like that. Yeah. I mean, that's stark. It's a stark way of phrasing that. Like Jessica would have been in reach if she were like me in this specific way that I've decided is very, very important, but she's not. So she's nothing to me almost.
Yeah.
Like
yeah.
there's nothing more to say.
Her continued inability to think that anyone that does not have a power is able to understand or empathize with anything she's going through has been an element of the story from the very beginning. And this is the culmination of it. This is the if not for your humanity, we could have connection.
Yeah. Yeah, it's sad.
It is.
Then we get to the last scene of this chapter where Victoria seeks out Annalise for some sexual healing. And Scott, I really wanted to be happy about this. Like, this is obviously a sex positive show.
Hell yeah.
I don't think I would call this event negative or bad choice, but it is at best a hollow comfort, an ineffective distraction. At worst, it's something that she's going to regret that will make her ultimately feel even more alone. And even as Victoria and Annalise start to get it on here, Victoria's still thinking about all the stuff that she's trying not to think about.
Yeah.
And all that stuff has a lot to do with her being benched, isolated further. And there's far more text in their macking session about regrets, mantras, identity, and isolation than there is about the hot dude she's undressing. And we know that Wild Bill can write raw sexual energy. This scene is sexual energy that's being like smothered by a thick blanket of terrible sadness and loneliness.
Yeah, I really feel like if this was supposed to be a moment of triumph, of yay, she's finally got past her shit enough to do it, it would have played in a very different way than it does.
Yeah.
Because I totally agree with you. It's almost dissociative, right? There are two Victorias existing in this moment. The animalistic Victoria that is enjoying the most basic animal-driven wants, desires, physical sensations, and then there's this other Victoria floating above it all that's thinking about the text message that benched her, thinking about everything that's going on with her, that is focusing on all this stuff. I love like this line here is just perfect. I thought without thinking about anything. My brain a febrile, I think. Febrile buzz. I love that word. I love that sentence. I thought without thinking about anything. It is perfect to describe this mood. It is sad. It's just sad. And yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I don't think this is a bad decision. I just don't think it's going to do anything. I think it's going to be cold comfort. And I think she's going to wake up the next morning and regret it. And also still just feel as isolated as before, possibly even more so. Because like the idea that, okay, well, at least I'll have this, at least I'll have just, basic physical connection still. Oh, well, that didn't fix anything. So right. I don't even have that anymore. And this is one more thing.
Yeah, I agree 100%. Yep. It's I mean, it's like we wanted her to get to this point. And it's just kind of nothing. It's just kind of
I mean since the shower imagination, like the whole narrative she builds of the shower sex, like I've wanted this to happen, but this is not the way I wanted it to happen at all.
Right. Yeah. I don't have much to add really. Yeah. I mean, it's as the chapter wraps up, you feel like she even says to herself that she might have regrets, but that regret was for tomorrow. And it's like,
yeah,
well, Okay, then.
Well, yeah, I mean, she repeats her mantra, right? Follow the law. When that fails, do what feels right. When that fails, reach out. And above all else, above all those other three things, the core bit of her character above all else is avoid doing what I might regret tomorrow. And then specifically, she says, well, that regret is for tomorrow. It's like, but no, you just said.
Yeah, that's your whole thing. You're no. Yeah.
Well, and it's great because, like, follow the law. The law has benched you, so it's failed you. Do what feels right. I can't trust what feels right at all right now. When that fails, reach out. I have no one to reach out to. Above all else, avoid doing what I might regret tomorrow. That's out the window as well.
Yeah.
So
just knock down all those.
What's left?
Yeah.
What is left? And that is what we leave the scene with.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's horrible. It's sad.
Mm-hmm. It is.
I'm
very
worried.
Sad.
I'm worried.
I am so worried for Victoria and what she's going to do when all else is stripped away except for waste. What happens?
Yep. I guess we'll see. That's what Sundown is about.
Yep.
So that wraps up the chapters this week. The discussion question from last week was, could you be reconstructed from all available data about you? A lot of really cool answers this week. So let's just get into it. Bisexual Punch Party says no. Going by historical records, internet posts, photos, and such, you could create a caricature of Bisexual Punch Party. But, quote, whenever people tell me what they think I'm like, I disagree with it. So there's a disconnect between how I interact with the world and my concept of self. And then they go on to say a Kinsey-style 4D snapshot might enable you to make a P-zombie of them, but it would still lack the inner life. And then they say, I think the hardest part about recreating someone is what we see in the flock. You can't 100% capture someone's relationship to themselves, which is the most important relationship in your life. I really love that line. That's fucking fantastic line.
Yeah, that is beautiful. I love that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sir Periplin says, if people can't be reconstructed, I can't read anymore, from the data collected by extra-dimensional space wheels, then parahumans aren't themselves. What do you think happens when a regenerator gets a concussion? Where does Shadowstalker's brain go when she is in mist form? How did Alexandria think at all? I think Scapegoat got a glimpse of that truth when he got his power, and that's why he went a bit insane. That's an interesting angle that, like, because of just the nature of how powers work, literally every parahuman is a reconstruction in some way.
Yeah, that was a really fun idea for me.
That send me down a rabbit hole.
Yeah, that's me too. Exactly. Helpful Hindrance mentions that season 2, episode 1 of Black Mirror is basically addressing this question. No spoilers, of course, but yeah, I've seen that episode. It's great.
Yeah, I agree. That is good. I didn't know you've seen that episode. I thought you didn't watch all Black Mirror.
I've watched like 3 episodes of Black Mirror, and that's one of them.
Just so happens to be one of them. Okay.
Yeah.
Mother Cloud says no, not with currently available data for probably.
Oh
yes. What?
Sorry. This is my.
Matt, what is
my
your
writing.
English here?
This is oh Jesus Christ, Matt! What the hell is wrong with you?
I don't understand. I'm sorry, Mother Cloud.
Basically, they say it would require like full molecular scanning technology to capture everything about you, like your sense of taste. But no, it wouldn't be possible with currently available data, like what's available right now.
Sure, that makes sense.
Yeah. Fluid Horror also says no. They believe in a soul, although they are agnostic as to what that soul is. So basically, they just say there's more to a person than the sum of their parts. And then they say, take all my memories and dump them in a different person, and it's a different person with all the same memories as me. But it's not me. Not unless you have some way of also scanning/transferring my consciousness, so to speak.
Yeah, that idea of a soul is really, I think, at the core of this question, right? Is there some part of you that, like Fluid Hoarder said, is more than just the sum of everything that is you?
Yeah.
Is there some? And yeah, it doesn't have to be a religious connotation. I mean, some people will take it that way, but the idea of a soul does not necessarily have to be spiritual or religious. It's just, is there something beyond you? What, like, that gets this idea of what is consciousness, what is existence, right?
Yeah.
And I like that because I tend to agree with Fluid Horror. I do think there's something, I don't know, there's something there. There's something
right.
different. I don't know how to explain it. I don't know how to it just seems like it is essentially true.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a pretty big like materialist reductionist, but the fact that there is a feeling of what it is like to be me is weird.
Yeah,
unexplained. It is unexplained, and that is one thing that crops up in these conversations is this idea that like, well, okay, what is that, and how does that factor in? So yeah, cool.
July 83 says that if you created them from data, you would have another them, the same person in the category sense, but it would not be the same them, in quotes, not the same unique individual. Basically, they break apart the concept of being a person in two senses. Damsel is an Ashley, but she's swan song, not damsel. Regarding machine uploads, the critical question concerns continuity of consciousness, which is a good point.
Yeah, right. That's kind of referring back to what we were saying before. Transcendent one says they are all the data about them. They say there's no definition of me that makes more sense.
Yeah,
that's interesting.
I think another way of wording this question would literally just be, do you believe in the soul? Because I mean that is kind of like the amorphous concept of a soul. Because that's kind of like, if you believe that you are literally just the sum of all your parts, then a complete collection of those parts would be you. If you don't, it wouldn't.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, there's definitely a very small number of themes that repeat themselves in these answers, which makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things someone pointed out to us was that this answer is scarily close to our Ashley versus damsel thing, which true. True.
But don't blame me that the book is thematically coherent.
Yes. Blame Wildbow for thematic coherence.
Yeah.
Stelheck says yes, as long as the data contains metadata about how the data is organized. In the language of the story, shards are probably ignoring a lot of necessary metadata in how they're storing human copies. I like framing it that way because it goes back to my data analytics stuff. I like that.
Yeah, and it makes sense in context of like the flock and what Victoria said. It's all in there. It's just out of order.
Sure, yeah.
Kyrgyzstan says they leave too little social media presence and then lets us know their age and lets us know that their online identity is skewed, which is now information that we can take into account when reconstructing them. So,
well, thanks, Kyrgyzstan.
Yeah, that was a mistake, Kyrgyzstan.
Yeah, you're going to be a Kyrgyzstan 2.0 pretty soon.
Yep.
Death of the Artist asks if by data we mean just internet data or all data including others' memories, and poses some other interesting questions about what might constitute data. They also ask if you refers to the pragmatic societal you, something outwardly recognizable as you, or the you that actually feels like you to you. There's a pretty long this is a pretty long comment that explores a lot of ideas, and I do recommend reading it. Yeah, Death of the Artist, I think, has historically, when they've answered questions of us, done a really good job of, kind of taking the question and breaking it into its fundamental parts and then questioning the definition of these terms that I think a lot of us take for granted. Like the idea of when I had a question like, well, if you had all the data about you, would you be you? I didn't stop to think about what any of those words actually mean specifically, right? It's just like the broad understood example. But I like that you can actually sit down and break this apart and talk about what these words mean, because they do have multiple distinct meanings, as Death of the Artist has pointed out.
Yeah, it's a style of thinking that I like. I really did like that comment a lot.
Mm-hmm.
X Das Niveau muses on whether thoughts are data and points out specifically how different sources of data would generate different skewed impressions, akin to our conversation about how our podcast selves are skewed in different ways. Yeah, I mean, for sure, right? Like that was, I think, a big kind of, not a deficiency, but something about our question that was left to be filled in was, well, what do you mean by data? And yeah, I mean, if you have like a passive thought recorder, then that's going to do you a lot more good than like social media data. It is interesting how many people jump to the assumption of social media data, and now I don't remember if we actually said that on the show or not. So
I don't think we did, but I think it like our question specifically related to our online presence, because we talked about that for a while. So I think it's natural to kind of make that leap.
Makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, to like give a window into our process a little bit, we sometimes intentionally design these questions as broadly as possible as like a let's see what the people think about this one and where their brain, like, I think an interesting thing about a discussion question is kind of analyzing what your brain immediately goes to, right? Like the people that immediately took it as social media data or online presence is it's interesting to see that, well, that's what people assumed versus people like Death of the Artist that immediately said, oh, well, what do you mean by that word?
Right.
I think that's kind of, I think by design a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah. I like that.
Googleplex Byte says that the person, or did I skip something? I did. Did I skip a whole bunch?
I think you're
did.
up here. Yeah.
Coinitch asks an interesting question, which is, if I were to pop out a clone chamber or transporter with all of the data that constitutes me, then what basis do I even have to judge if I have been rebuilt or assembled correctly? I like that.
Yeah, right. They had a few other interesting thoughts in there too, but I thought that was fun. Like in contrast to Kid Win, who is aware of not being original Kid Win, it's interesting to consider, like, under what circumstances would you recognize that you were not the same as you had been before? That's kind of almost like a prompt for a horror short story or something.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many fun like cloning stories that really dive into this idea, right? They're like, you're the clone. It's like, well, I don't. What are you talking about? I don't feel like that. Shut up.
It's multiplicity. It's the best.
Exactly.
Best movie ever.
I love that movie.
Me too. Ruben307 says, yes, no, maybe, I don't know. Technically, no information is ever lost, so in theory, you could create a perfect reconstruction. But more realistically, at best, you could build a convincing simulacra.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's another element of the question, right? Is like, is it possible to create like theoretically possible or literally possible, right?
Yeah, I think that's interesting too, because I've heard this assertion made before that no information is lost and you can always reconstruct a person's mind from like the photons that go out into space and then bounce back from the stellar dust. And I'm like, my whole job is solving inverse problems, and I'm pretty sure that would be a lot harder than you're imagining. Even with really good computers, it's a matter of non-uniqueness. It's a matter of the fact that you would have like an infinite number of possible valid solutions to that problem.
Sure.
So you wouldn't know which one was the correct one, and then you haven't actually done yourself any favors. So I don't know. I'm open to being corrected on that, though.
Interesting. Googleplex says that the person gleaned from their online data might be a better person than their real self. I like that. I mean, I think that is generally true, that a lot of times when you're interacting socially, you put forward the best version of yourself, right?
Yeah.
So a construct of that would be that version of yourself. Like, I mean, like I generally agree that when we're doing this podcast, we are very much aware that we're speaking publicly, and we try to put the absolute best version of ourselves forward. You don't want to expose the shitty parts of yourself.
Yeah. I mean, I felt their comment was very introspective and kind of honest, and I appreciated that a lot.
I think, we all have to like examine ourselves in that kind of way.
Yeah.
Try to be the version of your person that you put out there.
Yeah. Be the person your dog thinks you are. _fellow Redditor asks if Coil should be punished for the wrongs committed in his simulated timelines, since the people in those simulations are basically reconstructions of those people. They further say they could be reconstructed from their neural architecture, but not from external data about them. I actually think that's probably true.
Yeah, what do you think about that first question, though?
The Coil thing? I have no idea, because the thing is, we don't actually know whether or not his shard was like simulating a whole universe, or if it was just sort of like giving him a movie of its like best guess of what it thought would like we don't like, was it really scanning and running full neural modules of every person in that world? Or were those people basically P-zombies? I mean, I think that's the interesting question, is how powerful do we think the shards are?
Yeah.
And how powerful do we think Coil's shard was? Because one of those answers, yes, that's horrifying and horrible. The other answer, no, that's not so bad.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Yeah, I don't know.
I
read this response and this question he posed, and I was like, fuck. Good question. I don't like. I think I'll escape to hiding by definitions, where it's like, well, what do you mean by punished? Like, should they not be able to do that anymore? Yeah, probably. I guess.
Well, Coil in one timeline should be put in prison, and the other one should be free. There you go.
Sure.
That doesn't make any sense.
No, not at all. Anti-Chris says, nopey nope nope. You can give me a world-class chef. Me and a world-class chef. Anti-Chris is not saying they are a world-class chef. You can give me and a world-class chef identical ingredients, but the meals would wind up preparing would be radically different, and there isn't a person in the world who would prefer whatever mess I serve up. The process is as important as the ingredients. I like that framing a lot.
Yeah. I mean, again, getting to this idea that you can collect all the data you want about me, but if you file it wrong when you're building the simulacra, it's not going to be me.
Yep.
So I think that's accurate. Hero of Old Iron talks about the different identities and facets that they possess as a person and how you could probably build an approximation of them by gathering data on all those different facets. They also remark that if they had a hand in the process, they would definitely work to bring forth the facets of themselves that they want to be, kind of like Victoria does, and kind of make this point of like, man, if you could have a hand on the wheel during the process, why not take advantage of that opportunity? Why remake yourself exactly as you are when you could tune up yourself and make yourself better? I thought that was an interesting take on it.
Yeah. Hey, does the Shard world have a memory of me when I was running 30 miles a week? Because I want that one.
It does.
I want that one.
Does.
Let's put that one forward.
Yeah. I mean, everything that you've ever done is still there, Scott.
Let's do that. I want to jump off a cliff into that facet.
Let's do it, man. Okay. All right. This week's discussion question. Talk to us about your favorite example of a character in fiction looking bad within the story, despite you and the character knowing that their actions are justified.
Yeah, so this is recalling to Victoria's not great performance, even though she was totally in the right.
Yeah. I kind of wanted to call this reverse dramatic irony, but I don't know if that term makes sense.
I really just think it's dramatic irony.
Well, the dramatic, you do know something that other characters in the story don't know, but I feel like the distinguishing thing about this particular thing we're talking about right here is that you actually do share knowledge with one particular character, and it's that shared knowledge juxtaposed with the dramatic irony regarding the other characters that actually kind of makes this work. It's a complicated thing. I'm interested. Like, the thing was, I know I can think of examples. It's a very interesting thing when books pull it off, or movies or whatever. So I just love to hear some more examples. Of course, as usual, we said, anything in fiction. So there's a good chance that we're not going to like read massive spoilers for things, but
yeah, I hope not. I like these show me an example in fiction of this stuff, because I always find it very interesting what people pull from and what the question makes people think of. But yeah, it is always rough with spoilers where we're just like, can't read that one, but good job. So we'll see.
Yeah. All right. That's all we got for you this week on We've Got Ward. You guys are all part of this show, so feel free to provide us with advice, questions, or thoughts on this week's reading.
You can reach out to us via email at gotwormpod@gmail.com or over on our Twitter account at gotwormpod. My personal Twitter is at scottdaily85, and Matt's is at dramatic irony, more mail.
That's right, Scott. And if you like any of our shows and you want to support them, consider donating to our Patreon account at patreon.com/doofmedia. You can donate $1 a month or whatever else you can afford. Supporting us on Patreon gives you tons of great bonuses, like voting in the fan art contest and the costume contest, which has about a week left to go. Hangout sessions with the Doof crew. There was one of those this last weekend.
It was so much fun, Matt. You missed a good time.
Sorry to miss it, and I haven't even had a chance to watch it yet. But if you were to become a Doof patron, then you could go check it out retroactively, actually.
Yep.
And of course, access to live streams of our recording sessions like this one, and the Discord chat where we have 4-hour conversations about Eric.
Also, cheese. We had a whole fucking big Discord fight about cheese.
I missed this somehow.
You're lucky. It's all Matthias's fault.
Okay, great. I'll go catch up on that too. And as always, make sure you head over to patreon.com/wildbow and donate to Wildbow as well, because this is his world. We're just playing in it. And this week, special thanks to new patrons Bidoof, Rob S., and Doof Dancers, Twilight's View, Morgan G., and Charlie R.
Thank you so much, guys. I say it every week, and I mean it every week. It is incredible that you guys allow us to do this thing, and we've grown to the level we're at, and getting to do more shows and new stuff. And I'm finally buying Elise a better microphone, because the mic she's been using for the past year is like a cheap, terrible mic that I used to use, and now she's gonna have a nice, fancy one, which will hopefully make it so she doesn't blow up the mic constantly. Please, fingers crossed.
That'll be nice. Speaking of other Doof shows, Media MD is talking about Neil Breen's Twisted Pair.
Oh my God, Neil Breen.
They're up to 12.6 of Packed. And the Do the Right Thing words this week are spooky Halloween pumpkin candy.
Oh my God.
It's a weird coincidence.
I couldn't remember those words on the What You Say episode, and I got it right. Look at me. Really? I'm so proud of myself. Also, we have our book club coming up this Friday, the 25th at 9:30 p.m. Central Time. We're going to be talking about Middle Game. I'm very excited for that. So if you've read Middle Game before, or if you haven't, still time. And then you can hang out with us Friday night and talk about this book.
Yeah.
That's it. That's all the shows. I mean, there's technically more shows, but that's all the shows we're going to talk about this week.
All right.
And of course, if you can't afford to donate to any of these excellent shows right now, that is absolutely okay. You can still help us out. You can share the podcast. You can retweet it on any of our socials when we do that. And you can leave us ratings and reviews on Apple Podcasts, on Stitcher. If any of your platforms let you do reviews, you can leave them there too. It really does help, guys. Those reviews make us look legit, and we need to look legit. It's very important to be legit. Too legit to quit podcasting.
That's what they say. Yep. That's all we got for you on the show this week. Next week, the sun continues to go down as we head into the mother of all conflicts.
I forgot to change that again. That's last week's. Next week, Victoria sits on a bench. The end.